Welcome back to 9/11 TruthCraft. This is episode 9, where I summarize the evidence that's led me to conclude that advanced weaponry was used on 9/11. 9/11 TruthCraft is a video series for people like me who want to know what really happened on 9/11. An advanced weapon was used on 9/11 to destroy the World Trade Center and nearby buildings, and to damage the Pentagon. At the same time as the attacks, a cover story about hijackings was provided. The perpetrators of the attacks and the providers of the cover story are allied and are not related to any U.S. government officials or employees. This episode is inspired by someone on an internet forum who asked me about a piece of evidence that I was discussing. He said, "Is that what you're basing your whole theory on?" And of course the answer is no. My theory is based on many things, and here is an overall map of what I'm going to talk about in this episode. As I pointed out, two things happened on 9/11. There were some actual attacks, and then there was the cover story that was also provided. And I have always been of the opinion that the actual attacks were much more important than the cover story, that it doesn't really matter to me how the perpetrators covered up the story. The real story is important. There were 3 sites of attack on 9/11: Shanksville, PA, the Pentagon, and the World Trade Center. And the World Trade Center has a lot of evidence that you can draw upon. There's eyewitness reports, photographs, independent forensic studies, as well as the government reports. But also, you need to draw on basic physical principles. The news stories of the day actually are quite confusing, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but those are also what I rely on for my theory. Eyewitness reports related to the 9/11 attacks come from all kinds of different sources. We have people on the street who were not burned by the dust cloud rollout, and they could almost but not quite outrun it. It was rather slow. The firefighters, these people were confused. These people absolutely did not expect to see the World Trade Center get destroyed as it was. The actions of the firefighters are important. These people are trained in fires. They know how to respond to fires. So they responded to this event as if it were a fire, to horrible results. There's a report from the 78th floor from a deceased firefighter who reported that there were 2 small fires that he should be able to take down with 1 or 2 hoses. Also, in the days and weeks in the aftermath, firefighters reported flowing metal at ground zero. This is very strange and needs to be accounted for. Victims inside the buildings, including Barry Jennings and William Rodriguez, report early damage much earlier than the quote collapses of the buildings. And in most cases, they don't report fires. What they report is that the buildings were crumbling. And in the aftermath, there's many reports of this long-term damage. And in fact, millions of people visited Ground Zero in the weeks, months, and years after the attacks. And they themselves can report on the long-lasting effects. Moving on to the photographic evidence, there's really 2 types of evidence: still images and video images. And there's really no discrepancy between what the still images show and what the video images show. One of the things you see is there's some holes in the side of the World Trade Center, and there's nothing inside the hole. But yet there were explosions, both when the buildings were initially attacked and also during the attacks. What's really underreported and underdescribed is the fumes. The color, the amount, the timing of the fumes. Almost no one is focusing the proper attention on what the photographic images say about the fumes. And if you look closely, it'll show that the World Trade Center buildings were destroyed from the inside out. Now, video images can show you some things that still images can't. Specifically, this nose out, which I'll talk about later at the World Trade Center too, and also the very fast fall of the World Trade Center buildings, as well as after the dust cloud rolled out, it started to sizzle and rise like bread dough rising. And really, video image can show you this. Moving on to the independent forensic studies conducted, I used the work of about 6 different scientists: Preddy, Blevins, Wood, Hall, Henry Quanier, and Millett. Preddy was a smell doctor. He went to Ground Zero and he tried to identify the World Trade Center stench, and he really wasn't able to. It should tell you something about how rare that smell was if a smell doctor was not able to identify it. My name is Dr. Tracy Blevins, and I discovered a huge cache of World Trade Center dust in my home at 75 West Street. This is probably the world's largest private collection of World Trade Center dust, and I've done a lot of studies on it, but most of the dust remains untouched, secured, and safe, and remains yet to be analyzed, but I found many things in that dust. While living at 75 West Street, I also observed the Deutsche Bank every single day and night for years until it was finally deconstructed. And I can tell you that the Deutsche Bank was continually emitting fumes until it was finally put to rest. Until the building was completely gone, every now and then you could still smell the same World Trade Center stench. The Sphere is currently located in Battery Park. The Sphere was anomalously damaged. And again, I will have to get through all the details of that in the future, but the Sphere tells the story of what happened to the World Trade Center as well. I've been studying the World Trade Center stench since the first few days after the attacks, and I can tell you that in the first few days, yes, it did have the smell of dead human beings, but that smell went away in a very short period of time. There was a long-lasting stench that came from that site that wasn't related at all to dead bodies. And it didn't smell like a burning building either. It was a very painful smell. It hurt your mouth or nose if you smelled it. It caused sinus problems. And it was really a unique smell that had no place in my smell memory. And my degree as a biologist allows me to understand what smell is, what different smells are, and certainly what a dead human being smells like. So I can tell you for a fact that the smell that was coming out of the World Trade Center for at least a year was not dead bodies. Dr. Judy Wood has an excellent website, and she wrote a great book called Where Do the Towers Go? And in this book, well, the book itself is basically a list of the different types of damage seen. It's a compendium of effects, and there are many. And Wood categorizes them and catalogs them quite nicely in her book, as well as making the connection between the damage seen and a possible Tesla weapon. Additionally, Wood is what might be the only lawsuit related to 9/11. She sued on behalf of the United States government, contesting that there was fraud conducted in the NIST report, and so that's also an important piece of evidence. Richard D. Hall has contributed a lot of important work, and he's basically analyzed the flight path of, the reported flight path of these planes that were supposedly flying in the skies, and he's come to the conclusion that it could have been a drone that helped a hologram to be presented in the daytime sky. Dr. Frederick Henry Coignet, he lives in Marseille, France, and he has tested World Trade Center dust for thermite. In fact, it was dust given to him by Richard Gage from Stephen Jones, and he repeatedly found that that thermite was not in the World Trade Center dust. And James Millett was also commissioned to conduct a study in the World Trade Center dust, and he found that there was no thermite in it either. Both of these scientists who studied the dust found a lot of iron fragments and a lot of iron oxide fragments, and I myself have found these fragments, but no thermite. Just to touch on the government reports a little quickly, these really related to the 9/11 Commission report and the subsequent report on World Trade Center 7, as well as the dust studies conducted. Basically, none of these are effective. None of these reports have come to a conclusion that makes sense given the circumstances. Physical principles are important to know here. We have the laws of motion we need to consider, principles of structural engineering and basic science like chemistry, physics, and biology, as well as how to conduct a research science in general, and that research science was needed. Good understanding of the laws of motion of the universe will put to rest any notion that the World Trade Center was destroyed by the collision of an airplane, as well as structural engineering principles, like just how strong steel is and just how well constructed the World Trade Center was, which they were very strong buildings. They were so strong, in fact, that they survived previous fires, several of them. Basic science can teach you what a fire is, and it will help you to understand that what was happening at the World Trade Center was not a fire, as well as that gravity alone is an insufficient explanation for the destruction of the buildings. Gravity alone is not a strong enough force that's capable of turning steel buildings into dust. The biology of smell is also important and related. But what I want to focus on here is that research science was needed. Most people did not understand that what they were witnessing on 9/11 was advanced weaponry. And if you're going to figure it out, you need to know how to figure it out, how to use research science to answer questions, and basically why the Bush administration didn't get the right answer. The Bush administration was notoriously bad at science. They cut all kinds of science funding. They put non-scientists at the head of NASA and other departments like the environment. So there's a good reason that the Bush administration flubbed the investigation. It's because they had very few scientists who were competent, who were at the top, who had the president's ear. News stories of the day were relatively consistent in good reporting of the facts, but awful at analysis, including using the word collapse to describe the destruction of the World Trade Center. Now, getting back to the other places that were destroyed or attacked on 9/11, the Pentagon and at Shanksville. If you look at Shanksville, there's really not a whole lot of evidence of a plane crash there. The coroner reported there was not a drop of blood to be found. There was a hole in the ground, but no plane in the hole, no luggage. Reporters said there is no evidence of a plane crash. As well as the famous photograph, The End of Serenity. If you look at the smoke in that image, it is much closer to what you would see in an ordnance blast and very different from what you would see from an airplane crash. The Pentagon, you saw a really small hole in the first floor of the building and a punch out all the way in the C ring, the third inner ring of the building. It seems hard to believe that an airplane crashing into the building could do all that. Traffic nearby was disrupted and it seems like phone poles were knocked down, but the video results do not depict a plane. The videos that were released of the Pentagon don't show any plane at all. Even though the cover story is less important than the real attacks, still, on 9/11, somebody supplied the cover story. There are some people that told the FBI the names of 19 Arab individuals. These people are the perpetrators. The cover story was used so that the perpetrators could get away with the actual attacks. The cover story also included a hologram plane that was flying through the sky, as well as supporting evidence related to the hijackings. The hijackings are the cover story. The perps needed a cover story because if they didn't have the story about the hijackings, then all of a sudden all you would have were these buildings that were standing there for 30 years that all of a sudden turned into dust. That wouldn't fly. People would have known that something was up. So they had to provide a cover story about hijackings. So in summary, I am not just using one piece of evidence that leads me to some strange conclusion. No, I'm drawing on every single bit of evidence that I can find. But it has to be real evidence that's supported with documents, physical evidence, something much more than stories. What's mostly out there that's considered 9/11 research is stories. And you won't really see that in my work. I do want to tell you that I sincerely would love it if you could donate to me on PayPal. I've been doing this work all by myself, and I do have a use for the money. I want to buy better microscopes. I want to buy better cameras, and I want to bring my work forward as much as possible. And if you donate, that will help me in that goal. But overall, this has been my summary of the evidence leading to the advanced weaponry theory, and I really do want to thank you for watching and hope you can tune in next episode where I continue to discuss the anomalous damage that happened north of World Trade Center 7. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching.